Hey everyone! Thank you so much for watching another episode of the Weaviate Podcast. We have a super exciting one, and also this is our 100th episode of the Weaviate Podcast. So 100 episodes of doing this. Super excited about it. So first of all, I'm super excited to be joined by Weaviate co-founder Bob Enlight. Bob, thank you so much for joining the Weaviate Podcast again.
No, I mean, Connor, thank you for doing like 100 podcasts. Oh my God, and I have to tell you, Connor, if I cannot go to a conference or a meetup where at least one person says something about the podcast, you've done such a great job. It's fantastic, and it's great to be back on.
No, thank you so much, Bob. That really means a lot, and yeah, it's really cool. Anyone, if you listen to the podcast and you mention it, that would make my day. So, yeah, thanks to everyone who does that. Awesome, and I'm super excited to welcome Lucas Negritto to the Weaviate Podcast. Lucas, formerly at OpenAI, is now building a super cool new startup around generative UI. So we're going to be diving into all things about the language model as the core engine, and the super exciting phrase that we love at Weaviate, AI native applications, and diving into what that entails. Lucas, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to chat about all this.
Yeah, this is really great. Thanks, Lucas. And if I may, just um, exactly as you said, Connor, is like this term like AI native, right? Sometimes people ask, so what does that mean, right? So how is it different? Um, and I had a dinner in San Francisco, and I was sitting next to Lucas, and we had a conversation, and he was sharing what he was working on, and I was like, that's AI native. That's such a great example of what AI native is. So I hope that people listening to the podcast that at the end that they go like, okay, so this is like really what's like the difference between adding ML to applications versus the new paradigm shift of, well, what we call AI native. So, can you share, Lux? Can you share what you're working on, and especially what the role is, how you're using the models in that?
Yeah. So my latest project is called Odapt, and the kind of time that I started working on this was about a year ago because I was exploring how can I build any type of AI agent that can generate code and do it in a manner that results in functioning code, and it can even be autonomous. So a lot of people were working on this type of thing, similar to what we would see now as like Devon, and I spent a lot of time on this, and it was very difficult because you would just experience a lot of these problems where the agent would get kind of lost and make mistakes and not understand the environment that it's really interacting in. And so it was a really hard technical challenge. And so I kind of took a step back and thought, how can I actually, build some type of AI system that allows someone to build an application either with no programming or do it very quickly? How can I actually just achieve that goal, right? Instead of just thinking about what everyone else is doing in this agent approach, how can I get creative and try something different? And so what I ended up kind of thinking was, in a front end application, what if you could basically have the LLM be a emulation or simulation of an application? So if you have something
Yeah.
like a web framework like React, maybe the LLM itself could be the framework. And so everything that a framework would do, like state management or handling conditionals or routing, these types of things, could all be happening inside of the LLM itself. Um, and so with this approach, I've found amazing success, and it's been like super exciting to see what kind of applications you can create that previously with these other approaches just don't really work very well right now. Um, and so it's a little bit hard to wrap your mind around what that means, but it's sort of like the DOM is the LLM. So like you're virtualizing the DOM inside of the LLM.
Yeah, and it's exactly when you said that I was like, that's an example. So let's take, before we go a step deeper. So just let me echo back and tell me if I'm wrong here. But so always when there's like a paradigm shift, people don't immediately take the paradigm shift, right? They take like intermediate steps to get there. So what we've seen with the co-pilots is that people basically said, okay, I have the React framework. This is my React code. Now I want to do something. I want to have it checked, or I want to add a feature. What should I do? What code should I write? And that's what the co-pilot did. That is what I would call adding AI or ML to your application, which is amazing. I mean, a lot of people get a lot of benefiting from co-pilots and that kind of stuff. Where you basically said, no, 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 I'm gonna skip that whole thing, and the front end framework is just there's just no framework anymore. It's just the knowledge that the model has, and it renders something for me based on how I'm prompting it, how I'm interacting, or that kind of stuff. Am I correct there?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think there's been other examples too of uh, when people do multimodality. I think it's also kind of approaching a lot of, uh, if you're doing things like, um, understanding audio, for example, and you're converting the transcription into text, the there it's not native, right? If you're sending that to an LLM to understand, there's all of this loss of information that's happening. You're not hearing the tonality of the person's voice, or the emotion and the pauses, and so I think when you're having a AI generate code for some external system, um, that's where you're sort of it's not becoming native anymore. It's not existing inside of itself.
Mm.
If that makes sense.
No, that makes a ton of sense, and I think an example that I saw, and it's quite some time ago already, and I forgot who showed. I saw it somewhere online where you saw that somebody prompted the model basically saying like, "You're a SQL database," and then they wrote SQL queries like create table whatever, and then next they said like, okay, insert into table, and then they insert, and then they started to query, and then they got the right results back, right? So there was no database. There was no database, and it was just the model understanding the query language, and therefore this person could just. But if you would have said, you're like a front end framework, and I'm going to give you interactions, then generate that. So I am curious because some people who are listening to this now, we need to make the devil's advocates argument, right? Because some people who are listening to this are going to go like, yeah, but it's slow, or it can still hallucinate, so you can trust it as a. What are the things? What are the things that you found in building this that you say, okay, we're clearly not there yet, and how likely do you think that you can potentially overcome them in the near future?
Yeah, so there's definitely a bunch of cons that come to mind. There's the issue of latency, and so every single time in my application, if you click a button, you have to interact with the LLM. So you have to wait, sometimes up to 10 seconds for the next
Mm.
state transition to basically happen. Um, there's also like no way to audit the program. So if the program does something and you don't understand why it ended up doing that, it's similar to a lot of the AI scientists working on interpretability. It's a little bit of a black box of how it ended up making some type of decision. And so, at mission critical systems, that could be, who you're going to point the finger at exactly, if you can't really understand how something went wrong. And I'd say that these types of challenges are very interesting because while that's an issue, there's something pretty amazing about the fact that when you're programming, there's so much like scaffolding that you have to set up to do some initial prototype or build, and then usually what ends up happening is you change a lot of the requirements or features later on, and so then you have to sort of do a refactor to then support this new growing, complexity of a program. And with this type of approach, you don't have to really worry about that anymore. It's extremely flexible and adaptable. So I think the way that we could maybe take like next steps is figure out like with this type of design, is there a way to maybe like reverse some of what it's doing and do some interpretability like analysis and be able to test the systems in a way that we can ensure we know what's going to happen given certain types of conditions and events. And I think as long as we can do that and we can know with certainty that the systems are reliable and we understand them, if it looks different in the future of what the system does, the way we build it and read it and understand it, if that looks different in the future, that's a little scary. But as long as we can do that, I think that's the thing we have to kind of cross to get there.
Yeah, I that's interesting. I actually, Connor, I have a question for you about this as well because Connor is kind of our DSPy expert. So, do you think sits a solution for this more? Is that just in the architecture of the model where something needs to change, or where, for example, the vector database might play a role with offloading stuff, or sit it more in the interaction layer where something like DSPy sits, or maybe another framework? But how do you think that we might overcome this challenge that Lucas just mentioned?
Well, I see a lot of people who want to build multimodal stuff with DSPy. It's definitely like a question people always come into the DSPy Discord and say, "Hey, has anyone tried to do this yet?" But yeah, I think you could have that kind of feedback loop where you just have like with DSPy, you basically have this framework of like having generative models give feedback to other generative models. So if it's producing the UI and then another generative model is evaluating it, but this almost kind of reminds me. This I think with this, the thing about the transitions is very interesting. Like you click a button and now you need to generate like the next kind of the UI. So I'm not sure I've like come across something of that sort before. I mean, the most similar thing that it reminds me of, I don't know if you remember the Game GAN thing from NVIDIA, like way back then, where they were producing like an entire video game out of a generative adversarial network, and you could like click the buttons and it would just like keep rendering the UI. But yeah, I guess you could probably structure I guess I'm still kind of wrapping my head around it as well, to be honest. But like, I imagine like the transitions is maybe the most computationally, or like that's like how do I get sound transitions between my UI that's being generated on the fly?
Yeah, yeah, that's actually interesting because Lucas, can you share a little bit about the stack? Are you using one model, multiple models? Are you frameworks? What are you? How are you? Your first, your first prototype. What did it look like, or how's
Yeah,
it?
it's extremely simple, actually. Basically, very simple prompt that says you are simulating an application. The user is given these instructions for how they want the application to look and work. And
Hmm.
then you hit start, and it then is kind of prompted to just output HTML. And so
Hmm.
you get HTML back, I render it, and then each thing like a button or a URL, each of the things that you can click have an event tied to it. And so if I click a button, the LLM is sent a message, and it's sent a message of which button I was just pressed. And then anything in the HTML that can hold like a value or some kind of state is also sent with that message. And so,
Can you give an example?
yeah, so let's say I'm making like a clone of Twitter. And
Hmm.
so I tell it I want a clone of Twitter. Let's make a timeline page. It gives the timeline page and a little box for me to post my tweet in. And so I can type into the box, hello world, and then I click the tweet button. Second, I click that, a message is sent to the LLM that says the user just clicked the tweet button and the value of tweet text box is hello world.
Mm.
Predict the output of the program. And so it then tries to guess what is the next output of the program. And it does fantastically well, turns out. It will then re-render the page now with my tweet below. And so here you have like this simulation of Twitter. Obviously, you'll run into some problems with data scalability, right? So you could have the entire thing run inside of the context window until you get too many tweets, and things, obviously slow down. And so I have also basically you can bring in any open API integration. So if you take that specification and you add it to the application, all of those are loaded in as actions or function calls that the LLM can do. And so then once it sees all of those in context, it can also sometimes predict, oh, I need to make an API call to post the tweet. I need to fetch the latest 10 tweets from the database and render those. So you can kind of on the fly change how the LLM is supposed to run the program. And each time you interact with it, if it doesn't do the correct next prediction, you tell it, hey, you weren't actually supposed to do this. You were supposed to do this other thing. And it will remember that and kind of store that in the prompt. So then in the future, when you run it, you get a more deterministic version where it kind of predicts things the same every time.
Yeah, and so one thing related to that I find interesting, and I was recently I was on another podcast where this came up in a different way, but it's like it's somewhat related. Is that one thing or like a challenge that I see with the approach that I'm curious to see how we will overcome this is that let's not take like a Twitter clone as an example, but something significantly more simplistic. So, for example, let's say that your prompt is, I just need HTML for um, uh, a big red centralized square, right? So it will give you something, but the problem with that prompt is that um, big and red are very subjective terms, right? So what is big, right? And what is, what type of red, right? That's do we want? Um, and now we're programming in natural language, but we start to use a lot of subjective terms. Like no, smaller, bigger, darker red or something. And then before you know it, we start to formalize the natural language to make sure that whatever it renders does exactly what we want. And then before you know it, you created another programming language, right? Because you need to somehow have a logic, even for the LLM to understand if you say big red square, that you're going to say like, okay, a red square that's 400 pixels wide or something. And then now all of a sudden you're getting closer to a programming language. So I think the question that I have, and I'm actually a question for both of you. I'm very curious how you guys think about it. So, do we think that the prompting will more result into new formalized programming language that just look more like natural language, or will we do something and then we being like the developer community, will we create something in the future where the model has somehow a better understanding of what the subjective terms in the prompt mean? I'm just curious what you guys think about how that will evolve.
Yeah, I think this is another point that's connected to the idea of AI native.
Mm,
Something that I've been thinking about a lot is seeing all the time people upset when anyone in the media uses AI generated artworks.
mhm,
And um, something that I've told like a lot of different people that I feel is an issue right now with AI generated art or now AI generated music is we have these labs that are pioneering models that can actually do this well.
mm,
But these a lot of the people working on these types of things, there's this huge opportunity in post training, I think, to redesign how the interaction with the model works to fit a particular user's workflow. And I think like an example of this is GPT-3 being just a prediction machine, and so would just kind of ramble and go in funny directions when it would generate text, versus doing post-training to add instruction fine-tuning and instruction following.
Mm-hmm.
That's an alignment to in a step of designing how we actually interact with a model. And I think where we're going to see much more larger adoption and acceptance of models is when people who really use a particular workflow. So if I'm like a designer and I'm working on something that's like a new type of Figma that uses AI, and I'm not just an AI researcher, I might have some understanding of how to design this tool in a way that makes it feel much more like a tool and not sort of some random number generator. I think like a lot of artists have been very upset with, using Midjourney, is because they don't feel like they have a lot of control over the output a lot of times. And you want to feel expressive with whatever tool you use. And so I think my answer to your question would be is like, it'll depend on who the audience or the user is. And maybe programming is going to open up to a much larger audience. And in that case, there's going to be different ways that they're going to want to express, right? So if they can't just express it in, oh, I want something that's red and, a square, maybe they're going to draw it. Maybe they're going to have some other way of being able to demonstrate what it is. And it might not just be a formal language, I think.
This is a very good point, because the assumption I made in the question was that the prompt is in a natural language, and that of course does not have to be the case, right? So that's interesting. Curious if you have thoughts on this, Connor. Do you have thoughts on how this will evolve if we start to do stuff more in the model? Is it, if it's gonna be more formalized, or is it just gonna double down on that subjective nature, on like how we talk, but also, as Lucas just said, draw, gotta sing, speak, whatever, right?
Yeah, I think if I can keep my like DS Pi expert hat on that you gave me earlier, I really like the like this idea of having like human interaction in the feedback loop of DS Pi. It's all very like models training other models, but the idea of like having more interactive, like maybe refactoring, like if people are getting into DS Pi, they have optimizers like MIPRO and CoPro and so on, and like maybe refactoring it so you have like just one step and you can design that kind of human interaction into that. That would be keeping the DSPy hat on. But more broadly in this conversation, I'd say I really like, Bob, how you brought back up that like symbolic languages. Kind of like when I first heard the pitch from Lucas, I'm thinking like, like Gary Marcus and the neurosymbolic crowd would be like, oh, what have you done? Like no symbolic system at all. And but like, yeah, like this kind of like learning categories on the fly, I think is really cool. Like we interact, we start designing, and then I like create some categories out of that.
Yeah, and actually, now I'm thinking about it, and we're just kind of on a meta level about this. Isn't actually also, aren't we doing that when we write software, right? So I still so of course, what I do now at Weaviate has changed a little bit how I write software, because I don't write production software anymore. But if I want to have a report or something, then I just write a little bit of Python and I get out, or I want to give a demo or something, right? Then I get that information. It's rarely the case, if not ever the case, that one, I make zero mistakes in what I write, and two, that um, there's a creative process happening while I'm writing the code, right? So I'm like, oh, actually, if I write it like this while I'm writing it, then I can do this or that. So there's a creative process happening, which actually, if you think about it, is pretty slow, because I need to write the code, and so then actually let's say that I want to design a website that just has a big red square on it. I might not know in the beginning how many pixels wide and the height that it needs to have. So I'm going to say, let's start with 400 pixels. And I go like, nah, let's make it 480. Whereas what you said, look, if I actually just draw it, I might actually get quicker to my end result than if I would use a formal language like a programming language. So maybe I am myself too much stuck in the old in the old paradigm of traditional code writing. And the can we also linger a bit on the idea of speed? So um, one of the things that we've seen just in traditional technology, right, is that um, from day one that we had computers, people were, for example, making games. So games is an easy way to think about it, but it could also, or it could be the web, right? So let's stick with the web, right? So the first websites where it was just reading material, right, and we just had a handful of HTML, a syntax that we could use to express something. The faster the internet became, and the more we could interact with it, the more creative people became in the websites that they were creating and the applications on the web and that kind of stuff. Are there things now, Lucas, that you would want to do with what you're building right now that you can see that you see that it's possible, but because of the latency, it's not practical yet, that you just can't do it yet? Is there stuff that you hope that if the latency decreases, that you know, like, okay, now I can do this super cool thing that I can't do right now, but I know it's possible if latency goes down?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I still have to work out to, take my product to the next level is solving latency in general. Right now, since it's running on GPT 4.0 or Sonnet, when you're building the app, the interactions are very slow, especially when there's a lot of HTML. And I've done some experimentation with Llama and Quen. And what's interesting with those models is that when you fine tune them on this type of data, you can get a much smaller model to
Mm,
run the program. So I'm imagining that one place I can kind of start is when you create the application, you're using one of these larger models. And then after you save it, it kind of takes this compressed representation or summary and gives it to a much smaller model that then is going to run the program in more production setting. And that model is dumber. It can't, create a new thing, but it can, do the state transitions very, very quickly. Um, and so I've seen even just like with Quen 72 and Llama 70 billion, they already work to do this with no fine tune.
mm,
And so I think there's a path to get to simulating front ends and everything that they sort of need to do in a sort of kind of click and point situation. But there are like a bunch of limitations here still where having JavaScript is extremely useful. And so,
mm,
um, yeah, I can't think of like specific ones off the top of my head, but anything where you really need to see like very quick response, um, it's not going to work in all of those settings. So maybe that might be like dragging and dropping something. You're not going to have that very quick when you drag, you see that animation. So there needs to be some, combination with other types of systems now. But I think that there's a possibility where we get to a world where we have like something like a video game, and the entire video game is a model, and it is like Sora basically running in real time. Um,
mm.
so you can play, some simulated Grand Theft Auto, 8, right? And I do think that we're going to figure that out eventually.
No, okay. So this is what I'm so excited about with the whole AI native thing, right? Because I remember what was the moment that I had like this epiphany, this moment of epiphany, right? So, and it's somewhat related to what you said, Lucas, because somebody, and I don't know who did this, but like on YouTube, you can see these trailers of like a Star Wars by what's his name again? The famous director with the pastel colors. What's his name again? Wes Anderson. So they have like Star Wars by Wes Anderson, a trailer. So you see the images, there's some text and that kind of stuff, and that they say like everything is generated with with AI. And when I saw that, I was like, what you just mentioned, Lucas, from like GTA 8, it's not only going to be just rendered through model, but it's also going to be unique for all of us based on the stuff that we like in GTA. So you might like something different in GTA than I do, and then it just renders a different game for us. And that was when I saw that, I was like, yes, that's so clear to me that that's going to happen, because it's, as with any technology, it's always like, okay, latency is a problem, cost is a problem, and then we're going to spend a lot of time and effort on that, and then we solve that, and at some point, time X in the future, right? So and I think when I saw that, that was the eye opener. And I was in SF in the Czech, what is it called again?
Check.
The Czech, yeah, Czech 15. And I was just walking around, and there was just a couple of people, building stuff, and I saw this. There was this one team, and I saw it a little bit from a distance, but I like what they were doing. This was before that we had all these multimodal models that they had. I believe it was a game of Doom, and that they had like the screenshot of the game of Doom. They converted that into like ASCII art, so just screen ASCII, and then they asked the model, "What should we do?" And then the model said, "Go left," and then they went left, send it back, and so it was like super slow. But you could already see like the early days of like, oh yes, this is so gonna work with the multimodal models, etc., and so on and so forth. So that is something indeed that I could absolutely see that see that happen. What was for you? What was for you that moment? When did you think like, okay, wait a second? As you said earlier, you mentioned frameworks, but it can be a framework, but it can also be kind of be front end framework, but it could also be a game engine like Unity or something, right? That the model becomes the game engine, and so on and so forth. What was the moment that you had this moment, this aha moment, that you were like, holy shit, the model can actually be that?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to your example earlier with the SQL database. I saw somebody in the early chat GPT days when people were first discovering everything that it could
Mm-hmm.
do. And there was somebody who was simulating a bash terminal. Um,
Mm.
so they gave some prompt about like what the computer was, and it was um, some like cyber security, scenario. And uh, they're then interacting with some file system that isn't real. And um, but then held this really strong consistency on future predictions given past
Mm.
interactions, right? So if it invented a new folder with new files in it, and then go back and then you re-enter that folder again, of course it's going to remember what was there, and it does a really good job of doing that type of simulation. And so I think that was the aha moment that it could do this type of function. Um, and then I think where I kind of doubled down on it as this might be worth exploring for a product is I have so much skills in back end engineering, but I'm not really great at front end. And so I was always looking at ways to take a shortcut to build my front end. And so that's how this kind of project started, was was there a way I could do that? And I ended up giving it my API endpoints, and it created a version of my application, a user flow, a layout that I had never anticipated. And it was so much better than the way that I had imagined it. So much more intuitive. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I shut the program down. I started again. It's a completely different layout with a completely different thought process on how to do the user flow and interaction. And again, I'm like, wait, whoa, okay. This could be really, really helpful for anybody who's trying to design and brainstorm the different ways that they could, carry the user through some type of experience. There's something here to keep exploring. And just the speed of being able to do that without having to actually build the front end, that's what kind of got me hooked to keep working on it.
That's so cool. Do you have one, Connor? Do you have like what was your first generative thing that you saw that you were like, oh shit, this is not just like that you were like, whoa. What was like the first big thing that you saw related to this?
Oh, for me, it's definitely the style GAN, like the face pictures. That one,
Mm.
yeah.
But that is how old are those face? That is quite some time ago, right? Already.
I think it's like
Yeah,
2021, maybe 2020, or
yeah, I
maybe
think,
2020.
yeah.
Yeah.
Stalgan 2.
Sorry, what was that?
I think it was Stalgan 2 was the model, right? It was NVIDIA.
Mm.
Yeah, who did that?
Yeah. I remember that all that stuff came out. That I believe they had. Didn't they have faces and flowers or something? That they were like these people don't exist and these flowers are not real. I believe they had like something like that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. No, that was for me too. There was like that pivotal moment uh, of that. It was like because before that for me, machine learning was in that previous in that existing paradigm, right? So for me, my my career in machine learning started with just with individual word embeddings. That's how it started for me, which was awesome, and it already had that glimpse of like the future, as in that there was something, as I always like to say, so there's something magical about seeing the machine or the model say something, in this case about individual words, right, that I really enjoyed. But the thing is that uh, that was still like in the same paradigm of like search and recommendation and that kind of stuff. But then when I saw indeed also GAN and that kind of stuff, right? And I remember that that Microsoft had this model a little bit later, this language model called Gödel or something. It's still on Hugging Face, that was doing like, it was like shitty language predictions, but it was like, holy shit, this is so cool. This is like, it was so clear where that was going. So, and that was all around that time frame, too. So it's exciting. It's great. And I'm curious, Lucas. So tell a little bit more about like when, when can we see something? When can we play around with it? Can we see something? What are you going to release? What are you planning on releasing?
Yeah. So I'm gonna start a early beta program next week on Wednesday,
Great.
and it's going to be in like a wait list. But I'm gonna let a lot of people in, so you can go crazy. I'm looking for feedback, and I'm also planning to do a hackathon. I'm just in the early stages of organizing, but something I really want to do there is get together a group that are non-programmers,
Mm,
because I think that's where this tool really has a lot of potential. Is you can have no programming knowledge and build some pretty amazing stuff, especially because there's so many integrations that already come prepackaged. So if you're trying to integrate some external APIs and things like that, you just click, 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 a la carte, add them in. And now the model knows how to use them, and combine that with some UI or interaction. So that's what I'm planning to do to start off, and then I'll kind of take that feedback to then figure out when I can do a full general release.
Yeah,
Super cool.
So go ahead, Connor. Yeah.
I was gonna say it's gonna be hard to find people who don't know how to code in San Francisco.
Yes, totally. I think it'll still be really useful for people who are programmers. In my case, anyone who's not a great front end person, I think will be pretty excited this, because it's pretty easy to bring your own back end, and so you're already you're saving half the battle.
Yeah. You know what also would be fun to do to I don't know how the interface, what it looks like, what you're building, but the to do something with like kids or something, right? Because they know
Yeah.
websites, they know apps, but they surely can't, I mean, assume that they can't code if they're young enough, right? So, and they're going to be super creative probably what they're going to prompt. So that might also be super interesting to learn from.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a great idea. The creativity that kids have. No, I
Yes,
should 100% go through with doing something like that too. That's a great idea.
exactly. So this was great. I think to recap this, and thank you so much also for doing this, Lucas. Um, Again, you it was, you have such a clear, the vision that you, what you were talking about, what you're building. That was such a clear example of like, yeah, this is not adding on, and there's nothing wrong with adding on. It's fine, but like really going for the new paradigm shift where it's AI first. So hence the term AI native, and it's great that that you've been sharing this. I think people are gonna like that, to hear this, because we what I notice when I talk to people, that still a lot of people are going through the mental shift of this paradigm shift that's happening right now. So I hope this is inspiring to people to see what's coming.
Yeah. No, thank you for having me. Super great to chat with both of you about it. So thank you for listening to it. And yeah, overall, I think we're all figuring it out together, right?
Yes,
There's so many question marks still. So it's great that we can all kind of be there experiencing it together.
of course, but we'll figure it out. And Connor, again, thank you for like doing 100 podcasts. It's amazing. It's like the depth, the knowledge, the stuff that guy has is just, it's I'm jealous of it. So it's a thank you so much. It's fantastic, and thanks, Lucas, for being part of it. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to grab some time with you and learn some more about DSPy. Did I say that right? DSPy.
Yeah.
I actually joined their Discord and did build a little sample program, but I didn't get to the compile step. It was more just like kind of some kind of chain of prompts. So yeah, would love to learn more about that.
Fantastic.
Definitely. Well, thanks so much for that, Bob, and thanks so much, Lucas. And yeah, podcast number 100.
Dante.
Glad I could be the number 100. It's awesome.
Yes, it's great to have you on. Thank you.
Awesome.